David Park was known at JFK Airport simply as an experienced tower operator. At 45, a former Air Force radar technician, he now worked in civilian aviation. Nobody knew he'd been a military radar systems expert for 20 years, until that night when he saw an impossible flight path on his screen. But before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, welcome to The Last Witness. We share the most amazing untold stories of ordinary people with extraordinary secrets, stories where someone becomes the final witness to incredible events. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. And if you enjoy this story, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps us continue bringing you these incredible tales. Now let's get back to David's story. David Park had been working as an air traffic controller at JFK International Airport for 8 years, managing some of the busiest airspace in the world with the calm precision that had made him one of the most respected operators in the New York TRACON facility. At 45, with graying hair and the focused demeanor of someone who had spent decades making split-second decisions that affected thousands of lives, David appeared to be exactly what he was, a highly skilled civilian aviation professional. What his colleagues didn't know was that David's exceptional radar skills and uncanny ability to track multiple aircraft simultaneously had been developed during 20 years of military service as an Air Force radar systems specialist. David had operated some of the military's most sophisticated detection equipment, tracking everything from enemy aircraft to ballistic missiles to stealth fighters conducting classified operations. David's military career had taken him to radar installations around the world, from early warning systems in Alaska to missile defense facilities in the Middle East. He'd been trained to identify aircraft signatures, analyze flight patterns, and detect anomalies that might indicate hostile intent or unauthorized activities. David's specialty had been operating advanced radar systems capable of tracking objects that were designed to avoid detection. He'd learned to recognize the subtle signatures of stealth aircraft, identify electronic countermeasures designed to confuse radar operators, and distinguish between legitimate military operations and potential threats. But David's military career had ended abruptly in 2015, when budget cuts eliminated his position and dozens of others in the Air Force's Radar Operations Command. Despite his exemplary service record and specialized expertise, David found himself facing mandatory retirement at age 37 with limited options for continuing his career in military aviation. The transition to civilian air traffic control had required extensive retraining, but David discovered that his military radar experience translated well to commercial aviation. His ability to track multiple aircraft, anticipate traffic conflicts, and maintain situational awareness during high-stress situations made him exceptionally effective at managing complex airspace. David approached civilian air traffic control with the same methodical precision that had characterized his military service. He studied aircraft performance characteristics, memorized standard operating procedures, and developed an intuitive understanding of how different types of aircraft behaved under various conditions. But David's military training had also left him with analytical habits that went beyond normal civilian aviation requirements. He naturally looked for patterns in aircraft movements, inconsistencies in flight plans, and anomalies that might indicate non-standard operations. Most of the time, these observations were simply intellectual curiosity. Commercial aviation operated according to well-established procedures, and deviations were usually explained by weather conditions, mechanical issues, or routine changes in flight plans. David had never encountered anything in civilian aviation that triggered his military-trained instincts for detecting unauthorized or clandestine operations. That changed during a late shift on a Thursday night in November 2023. David was working the midnight shift in the TRACON facility, managing traffic for aircraft approaching and departing JFK Airport. It was a relatively quiet night with moderate traffic levels, the kind of shift that allowed experienced controllers to maintain smooth operations while staying alert for unusual situations. At 2:47 a.m., David's radar screen showed an aircraft approaching from the southeast that immediately caught his attention. The aircraft was flying at an unusual altitude for its position, following a route that didn't match any of the standard arrival procedures for JFK or the surrounding airports. David attempted to contact the aircraft using standard radio procedures, but received no response. The aircraft's transponder was operating, indicating that it wasn't trying to avoid radar detection entirely, but the transponder code wasn't assigned to any flight that David could find in the air traffic control system. David's military training kicked in. An aircraft operating in controlled airspace without proper communication or flight plan coordination was a serious safety violation at minimum, and potentially an indication of more serious unauthorized activity. David consulted the facility's supervisor and began tracking the unidentified aircraft more systematically. What he discovered was deeply concerning. The aircraft was flying a pattern that took it over several sensitive locations in the New York metropolitan area, including military installations, government facilities, and critical infrastructure sites. The flight path was too precise and too purposeful to be accidental navigation error. More troubling, David's analysis of the aircraft's radar signature suggested that it was equipped with sophisticated electronic systems that were interfering with normal radar tracking. The aircraft appeared and disappeared from his screen in ways that indicated it was using some form of electronic countermeasures. David had seen similar radar signatures during his military career when tracking aircraft equipped with classified stealth or electronic warfare capabilities. But those systems shouldn't have been available to civilian aircraft, and certainly not to aircraft operating without proper authorization in controlled airspace. David attempted to contact other air traffic control facilities to determine if they had information about the unidentified aircraft. What he learned was even more disturbing. Controllers at Newark, LaGuardia, and Westchester airports reported similar sightings over the past several weeks. Unidentified aircraft had been appearing on radar screens throughout the region, following routes that took them near sensitive facilities, then disappearing before controllers could establish communication or coordinate interception. David realized he was looking at evidence of a systematic surveillance operation targeting critical infrastructure in the New York metropolitan area. David's military experience told him that this kind of coordinated reconnaissance activity was typically conducted either by foreign intelligence services gathering information for potential attacks, or by domestic organizations planning operations that required detailed knowledge of security procedures and response capabilities. Either possibility represented a serious national security threat. David decided to contact federal authorities rather than following normal aviation reporting procedures. He called the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force and requested to speak with agents who specialized in aviation security threats. Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez met with David at JFK Airport the following day. Agent Rodriguez had extensive experience investigating aviation-related terrorism and immediately understood the significance of David's observations. "Mr. Park," Agent Rodriguez said after reviewing David's radar data, "what you've documented appears to be a sophisticated surveillance operation targeting critical infrastructure. This kind of systematic reconnaissance is typically a precursor to planned attacks or other hostile activities." Agent Rodriguez explained that the FBI had been investigating reports of suspicious aircraft activity in several major metropolitan areas, but had been unable to identify patterns or coordinate responses because the incidents were being handled by different air traffic control facilities. David's military-trained analysis had connected activities across multiple facilities and identified the systematic nature of the surveillance operation that individual controllers had been reporting as isolated incidents. "We need your help to track and identify these aircraft," Agent Rodriguez continued. "Your radar expertise and ability to recognize non-standard operations could be crucial for understanding what we're dealing with." Agent Rodriguez asked David to begin systematically documenting any unusual aircraft activity and coordinating with federal agents who would be monitoring the situation from a national security perspective. Over the next 2 weeks, David worked with FBI agents to track the unidentified aircraft and analyze their operational patterns. What they discovered was evidence of one of the most sophisticated surveillance operations ever conducted against American infrastructure. The aircraft were being operated by a foreign intelligence service that had been systematically mapping the security responses and defensive capabilities of critical facilities throughout the United States. The flights were conducted using aircraft registered to shell companies and equipped with advanced electronic surveillance equipment. The surveillance operation had been gathering information that could be used to plan coordinated attacks on power plants, transportation hubs, communication facilities, and government buildings in multiple cities simultaneously. David's radar expertise allowed federal investigators to track the aircraft even when they were using electronic countermeasures designed to avoid detection. His military training in analyzing flight patterns and aircraft signatures provided crucial intelligence about the capabilities and intentions of the surveillance operation. The investigation led to the arrest of 12 individuals involved in the surveillance network, including several foreign nationals who had been operating the aircraft and transmitting intelligence to overseas handlers. The arrests disrupted what federal investigators determined was preparation for a series of coordinated terrorist attacks that would have targeted infrastructure in New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles simultaneously. Agent Rodriguez called David after the conclusion of the investigation to thank him for his contribution. "Mr. Park, your military training and decision to report suspicious activity prevented what could have been catastrophic attacks on American infrastructure. Your radar expertise was crucial for tracking and identifying aircraft that were specifically designed to avoid detection." David felt a familiar sense of satisfaction that he remembered from his military career. His specialized training had once again been used to protect American security interests, even though he was now working in a civilian capacity. David continued working as an air traffic controller at JFK, but he also began providing consulting services to the FBI and other federal agencies on aviation security threats. His ability to recognize unusual aircraft operations and analyze radar signatures made him valuable for identifying potential surveillance or attack preparations. David also worked with the FAA to develop new procedures for air traffic controllers to report and track suspicious aircraft activity. His experience had demonstrated that civilian controllers with appropriate training could serve as an early warning system for aviation-related security threats. But David's most important realization was that his military training and expertise remained relevant and valuable even after his official service had ended. The skills he developed during 20 years of radar operations continued to serve his country's security interests in his civilian career. On busy nights in the TRACON facility, surrounded by the constant chatter of radio communications and the glow of radar screens tracking hundreds of aircraft, David often reflected on how his career transition from military radar operator to civilian air traffic controller had evolved into a different form of national service. The sophisticated surveillance systems and analytical techniques he'd learned in the Air Force continued to protect American airspace, just through different channels and in coordination with civilian rather than military authorities. David had learned that the most important security often came not from official military operations, but from trained professionals who remained alert to threats and willing to use their specialized knowledge when they recognized danger. The last witness to his military radar career had become the first line of defense against those who would exploit civilian aviation for hostile surveillance and potential attacks. It wasn't the Air Force career David had expected to continue, but it was the service his country's airspace needed him to provide. And that, he'd learned, was more than enough purpose for any radar operator, whether tracking military targets or guiding civilian aircraft through the skies above New York City. On quiet nights when the airspace was calm and aircraft moved in orderly patterns across his screen, David sometimes allowed himself to appreciate the beauty of the system he helped maintain. Hundreds of aircraft carrying thousands of passengers safely to their destinations, protected by the vigilance of controllers who understood that their work was about much more than managing traffic. It was about ensuring that the skies remained safe for everyone who trusted their lives to the complex system of aviation that connected cities, countries, and continents in an intricate web of human movement and commerce. David smiled as he guided another aircraft to a safe landing, knowing that his military-trained eyes would continue watching for threats that others might miss, ensuring that the miracle of flight remained secure for all who depended on it. Thank you for listening to this incredible story here on The Last Witness. If you enjoyed David's journey from military radar specialist to air traffic controller to federal informant and want to hear more amazing tales of ordinary people who become the final witnesses to extraordinary events, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these untold stories that deserve to be heard. What did you think about David's decision to contact federal authorities when he could have simply reported the incidents through normal aviation channels? Do you believe people with specialized military training have special responsibilities to remain vigilant in civilian careers? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts on these stories. And remember, sometimes the most important protection comes not from official security operations, but from trained professionals who never stop watching for the patterns that indicate danger. Until next time, keep listening and keep witnessing the truth.